the oppressed. You and I are lobbyists for the afflicted.
What does the Lord require? That you do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God.
Welcome to another edition of the Black Faith, Black Power podcast. This is Bishop Dwayne Royster, Executive Director of Power Interfaith, and I'm glad to be back here with you today. We are actually talking to a great religious leader today who has been a very faithful member of the Black church community, very powerful member of the Power community. It's none other than the Reverend Dr. Greg Edwards, Senior Pastor of the Resurrected Life Community Church, United Church of Christ. That's a mouthful right there. He's also the Executive Director of the Resurrected Life Community Development Corporation and Director of Power Lehigh Valley, in addition to numerous accolades that can be attributed to him. He is a graduate. We share this in common. We're both graduates of Center for Urban Theological Studies when it was affiliated with Geneva College. So we both are Geneva College alumni. He got his Master of Divinity degree from Drew University, his Doctorate of Ministry degree from the New Brunswick Theological Seminary. He is a member of the College of Preachers for Morehouse, is it University or College? I never remember. Morehouse College. He is a former candidate for Congress in the Lehigh Valley area. And we are super excited to have him here today because our conversation today is going to be about the Black church and politics. And anybody that knows me knows full well that I'm not a fan of sports, but people say, what sport do you like the best? And I say politics. Politics is my sport. I follow it faithfully. I keep score and keep track of who's winning, who's losing, and figuring out how to be more strategic so the people that I know and care about can win more deeply. So Dr. Greg Edwards, thank you for being here with us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, my brother, Bishop. It is a delight to be with you.
Awesome. And we should also say that we're both a part of the Society for Faith and Justice. So we should just clarify that as well. I forgot to do that in the introduction, but that's okay. We'll get back to that at some point or another. I'm sure at some point somebody's going to email and say, what is the Society for Faith and Justice? It's a secret society. No, it's not a secret society.
Don't start that, man. you know, folks will be saying, is that a Masonic lodge? Is it a secret handshake? Do you get
No. By no means. It's an ecumenical religious order committed to social justice as spiritual discipline and spiritual practice. And so really glad to be here today and to talk with you about the many things that are going on in our community. So, Rev, one of the things that I encounter when talking to people about, and especially Black clergy, Black faith leaders, not just Christian, but Muslim, Jewish, and others, it's like they don't want to get involved in politics.
Right.
And my joke always is back. Have you ever been to a congregational board meeting? some of the deepest politics that ever happen in Black communities happen in Black faith communities at their board meetings. But there is there are a lot of clergy that do not want to deal with politics in the pulpit. They say that it's separate from their faith traditions. It's separate from their spirituality. I'm really curious, what would you say to that?
Well, first of all, it's a great question. I mean, I was raised in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. So you want to talk about levels of bureaucracy and levels of Black church politics. My goodness gracious, in terms of the polity. But in terms of my perspective, the struggle for Black freedom and Black faith are inseparable. And politics is inseparable because politics is about the arrangement of public relationships.
Okay.
So everything we do is political. Folk who tell me, well, I don't want to get involved in politics. Do you stop at a red light? Do you go through a green light? Where do you park when you go to the supermarket? All of those are politically defining external symbols that have involved politics. So our life is shaped by politics. And the preacher who wants to draw that kind of false dichotomy or line of demarcation saying this is the pulpit, this is holy, talk about politics as profane. I think that's a false dichotomy, and I'm concerned about. I would be concerned about the members of a particular congregation that did not have a cleric who was informed theologically with what is happening in the world around him or her. I mean, that's very problematic, and I hear that all the time, man. Yeah.
I mean, there are times and places, and I'll never forget. I was talking to an African American clergy leader, and talking to them about getting involved in power, and they were like, "I don't need you all because I got the mayor's phone number." And this was several years ago.
Right.
Not the current mayor in Philadelphia, but the previous mayor. I got the mayor's phone number. So I said, I'm so glad that you are so tight with the mayor. And I'm wondering if you can call the mayor right now and ask the mayor to raise the wage to $15 an hour. Since you're so tight, you got the mayor's phone number. Can you just make that phone call for us? It'll make my life so much easier. It will really bless a lot of people. Can you make that? I don't know that, and I'm like, okay, can we talk about the fact that access is not the same thing as power?
Yeah, and proximity,
right?
Proximity by having an elected phone number in your cell phone, does not mean that you can change the needle or you can get, some ordinance passed or some legislative piece of material through a certain political body. I mean, I see that all the time. And yet it's interesting that some of the same folks that will say that they don't want to involve politics in the pulpit will allow their congregation to be used by electeds during primary or general election seasons because they want to have that proximity, even if it's a photo op with the mayor, because somehow that sends a signal like, look, I'm powerful, when in fact, nothing could be further from the truth. You can't call an elected up and you can't get them to change a longstanding policy that impacts the people who you serve and who you shepherd, then you ain't got no power. That's not power having the phone number.
Right. It's like, and I always chuckle because the political leaders never give me their phone numbers because I would actually call them and ask them to do something, make a demand of them to do something, which is probably why they don't give me the phone number.
You're going to ask them to work.
I'm going to ask them to do their jobs on behalf of the people. And so I would begin to do that. Let's talk a little bit because you have run for Congress. You have been a person that's been elected. I've actually run for a political office as well. Got elected to as a councilman in Norristown, Pennsylvania, which is a municipality, about 30 miles from Allentown, about 10, 15 miles from Philadelphia. Let's talk about politics in the church, right? And preachers and lay members running for office. Should we or should we not do this?
Wow. I thought long and hard about running, and really one of the reasons why I ran was because in the area that I live in the Lehigh Valley, we have never elected a person of color to the state assembly, to state office, or to federal office. And as a matter of fact, no person of color really before I ever ran for federal office in all the Lehigh Valley, which is about 600,000 people. And I said, this is insane. We're talking about, at the time it was 2017, 2018. And so I thought long and hard about it, talked to my family, prayed, talked to the leaders of my congregation. We've always been a community engaged congregation, and we've always been politically aware. So we already had that foundation. Right. So it wasn't like this came out of left field, like, oh, now he wants to run for office. Now he wants to, they got it and they were on board with it. But I will tell you, unfortunately, because of the geography and the racial demographics of my congressional district, when I began to run for office and declared that I was running for that seat, because their framework of reference as it relates to Christian theology is, like Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell. Their framework is not Adam Clayton Powell.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
So their framework is not Adam Clayton Powell. Their framework is not the other brother. His name escapes me. Who's from Allen AME Church, Floyd Flake.
Oh yeah, Floyd Flake. Sure.
Their framework of the church in general is very monolithic, and there is no understanding or deep connection to the realization that Black faith, Black power, Black politics have always been intersectional, even though the Black church is not monolithic. But so immediately, what's my stance on abortion? What's my stance on gay marriage? What's my stance on? I mean, folk began to come at me, not realizing that, I was not the one, right? So there's a couple of hurdles to get through. I think looking back though, and I had a very good conversation with Dennis Wiley, who's the former pastor down there in DC.
That was my DC church.
Okay, yeah, Covenant Baptist United Church of Christ.
Yes, my family were members. We joined that church when we first moved down there.
And post the primary, lost by 3,000 or so votes. Post the primary, we had a really good conversation. I was going through a lot of soul searching, and he said, he said, Greg, hear me when I say this. I know it was a great leadership experience, but the community and your church in particular may have lost something very powerful in your witness if you would have won.
Wow.
And the reason why he said that was because he has found it very difficult that to be a prophet, and I'm not, all pastors are not prophets, but certainly I have a prophetic ministry and a prophetic calling, that prophets specialize in the art of confrontation. Politicians specialize in the art of compromise. And oftentimes there the two should meet. So, he talked about Adam Clayton Powell and how his ministry changed after he got elected.
Right.
See, people don't talk. He talked about Floyd Flake and how his ministry changed after he got elected. And I often think about Raphael Warnock, who's a Morehouse brother, and a great preacher and part of the prophetic Black tradition of preaching. And often think that, when the cameras start showing up and they start doing sound bites of his sermons, will that begin to change who he is in the pulpit? I'm not sure. Like I don't have the answer on that, but
can you be Jeremiah Wright, the Reverend Dr. Jeremiah Wright, right, and speak truth to power, and still be an elected official, right? I
mean, that really is like, that's my struggle, man. I'm gonna be, to keep it 100, as the young folks say. That is my struggle, because I have been approached to run for other offices, and I've said not now. And you can do other things and build power which can far exceed that of an elected.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you do it with the community and you do it the right way, right?
That's right.
I mean,
that's what we're trying to do.
One of the interesting things, one of the byproducts of me running is that pretty much anyone who runs for office in my area at some point will call me up and say, can we do lunch? Can we eat? Can we, whether that's for input. Some of them are seeking out endorsements. I don't endorse. But they'll show up at the church, they'll show up at an event or a function. So just that run by itself, and it was a good run, and we ran a great campaign, raised a historic amount of money for a new first-time candidate, got a record number of endorsements. So there was some power that was built there that was sustainable even in the midst of the loss. But I will tell you that there are other ways to build power beyond being an elected official. But I don't think we can be prophetic without engaging ourselves in politics.
Yeah. One of the things that I think that it's important for us to do, and this is a piece that I'm really intent on about imagining for power. We have to prepare people to run for office. And we need to prepare people not just to run for office as the elected officials, but we need to train their campaign managers, we need to train their field directors, their phone banking specialists, the people that will staff them. Now, look, I think this is a part of civic education that actually should be taught in schools, because how can you participate in democracy if you don't even know essentially how to participate in democracy. So, and I'm not talking about we're actually running people for office. I mean, people make their own choices about that, but we've got to do training, in our communities, within organizations like Power, to train people to run for office. This is how we're going to make significant change, when we actually get to a place that we're training our people to own the power in the public square.
I was amazed when I was doing door knocking back in 2017 and 2018. I was amazed that the average citizen doesn't know the difference between a United States House of Representative member of Congress and United States Senator. Did not understand term lengths. Didn't understand. I mean, so when you say state assembly, there's no points of reference. There's no hook to hang their hat.
Right.
So I mean, civic engagement, U.S. history, the different branches of government. We have so watered down the curriculum, and I think intentionally, to be honest with you. We have so watered down the curriculum around civics and public education, which is why, I mean, I think about Allentown, right? So the third largest city in the Commonwealth. We just had a primary. We have closed primaries in Pennsylvania, and 4 folk ran on the Democratic side, 1 on the Republican side for mayor. I think maybe 11,000 people came out and voted in a city of 127,000 people.
Wow.
I mean, that's
less than 10%.
I mean, so we're talking about a non-voting citizenry, and then we're talking about a non-educated citizenry around just kind of the basic functions of, hey, every 6 months there's an election. You know, hey, if you're not registered to vote, you can't serve. You can't serve if you're called to serve as a jurist. So the average folk. So that's our job. I mean, that's part of the prophetic ministry in the Black church, right? I mean, we're talking about issues. We are talking about those things that deeply impact people whom we say we shepherd, love, and care for. And if the word does not reach their avenue, their address, their street, as it pertains to clean water, clean air, affordable housing, healthcare, I mean, that's the act of ministry, right?
That's Matthew 25, right?
Right.
But it's Matthew 25 to the next level, right? Because the work of meeting the needs, but then looking upstream,
right,
and figuring out why those issues are occurring in the first place, and trying to change it upstream so that you can prevent the trickle of all the issues coming downstream.
But and you're absolutely right. So it's Luke 4, right? That's the ministry of Jesus. Matthew 25. So it's not just I was hungry and you fed me, right? It's not just the church Operation Breadbasket, right. But we're going to fight against the elimination of SNAP benefits, because that impacts the people we love, right? So dare I step into that water upstream, I'm going to be political.
Right. And
I think some of it is, there's this notion.
But can we also raise the wage?
Right.
So that people don't need the SNAP benefits, right?
But part of it also too is we've got to change the narrative of, once again, the Black church, Black preachers are not a monolith.
Right.
But we've got to change this narrative around respectability and being nice, because everyone expects clerics and that's part of the narrative that helps folks stay in their place. So we don't want to fight City Hall, or we don't want to necessarily confront those that are making the people we love invisible and disposable, because we have been shaped by a narrative that say that clergy are supposed to be kind and nice, right? And so to step out there and be prophetic often means shifting the narrative, which means you probably are not going to be liked by some folk, right? So it's interesting how we who follow Jesus, who obviously was not popular, right? We say we follow Jesus, but yet we want to be respected. We want to be lauded as being nice and kind. And if you're doing the work of prophetic ministry, there are going to be some folk who going to come for you.
Well, I mean, I think The problem is that many of our institutions that train our clergy train people to be priests or chaplains, and are not good vehicles for training people to be prophets. And so our model of ministry, even our denominational structures, if we're really going to get into it, our denominational structures force almost everybody who wants to be ordained into the pulpit ministry, right? Or the chaplaincy. Those are the two legitimate ministries to which you can be ordained to, and don't recognize that we actually need an ordained class of prophets that are going to be in the public square, that are going to be, deeply political theologians in the public square, that are going to speak truth to power and challenge the systems, right? But here's what happens when we are not critical. The priests and the chaplains align themselves with empire,
right,
and then fight against the prophets. Right. And this is not a new thing, right? So this is also in the Hebrew Bible. We see this in the Hebrew Bible, right? It was Ahab, had his prophets that were saying, "Oh no, God is with you," and the prophets of God were like, "We're coming after you. God's coming after you," and so. But if we don't have critical abilities and understand what's happening, we will align ourselves with empire.
Right. I was just thinking the other day. And that's not to enshrine the entire civil rights movement, to only the legacy of Dr. King. But I was thinking that at the moment, right, of 55, 56, 57, Montgomery bus boycott, at the moment that the civil rights movement was beginning to really emerge. And, there was Billy Graham. And there was Billy Graham in Madison Square Garden. There was Billy Graham having these crusades, not saying a word, not saying a word. I mean, the country is in the midst of almost comparable to a civil war, right? And doesn't say a word. Somehow salvation, personal salvation, and that particular theological perspective, enshrined with empire, by the way, personal salvation, not societal salvation, totally didn't say one of the most powerful preachers in America at the time during the Civil Rights Act that was galvanizing thousands of people, never said a word about the racial injustice that was happening in the South and the North, and even impacting the thousands. I mean, there was a certain time, when I couldn't run into a Black person that hadn't, quote unquote, given their life to Christ during a Billy Graham crusade. Billy Graham didn't say nothing. I mean, I mean, it's real. It's absolutely real. And getting back to your issue, I mean, your question around, our seminaries, many of whom are tied to
and Bible colleges,
right? Those denominations are self-perpetuated in soils that can be traced back to injustice, right?
That's right.
So,
well, I don't want to say the seminaries, right? Because a lot of preachers I know across the state have also Bible Institute grads and Bible college grads, and they're not going to speak out about justice, or the form of justice that they're speaking out is actually exclusionary, not inclusive. Right. So I think a lot of the work that we do is actually trying to make more room at the table for more folk to be able to speak their truth. And, there is this sense that these other folk that, kind of like have two issues that they want to talk about. And those are only two legitimate issues for them to talk about. And we're talking about housing. We're talking about raising the wage. We're talking about education funding. We're talking about, being able to, for folk to be able to get SNAP benefits and things of that nature, right? Dealing with economics and racial. We're talking about the climate. And really trying to move out of an anthropomorphic theology that says that salvation is only about human beings and not about all of God's creation, which is the world itself. So, I think we're really trying to do that. So, you're a mentor to a lot of younger clergy. People look up to you. Like, you're a real powerhouse there in the Lehigh Valley and throughout the state and the country. When younger preachers are talking to you about this stuff, how are you trying to encourage them to embrace the prophetic ministry and throw down and not run from politics?
Yeah, I mean, that's another good question, because I think that, we have a responsibility to create an intergenerational movement, and we have a responsibility to help mentor those coming behind us. And I mean, that's been critical for me. I mean, I think about the folk that poured into me, Jeremiah Wright, when I was at Drew, Bill Howard, who I speak to almost every week. Bill was the president of New York Theological Seminary and pastor of Bethany Baptist Church in Newark. And so, having time in your schedule to be able to sit and to pour into. And I also find that they pour back into me. And sure. I mean, it's not just the one-sided. There was a great deal of reciprocity happening because their thinking is very different, right? They're coming at things, I mean, very differently than even folks in our generation. And so, I mean, part of it is making sure that they're well-read, making sure that they have an understanding of self. Like, where are their roots? What's, where, one of the questions that I was asked by Warren Dennis, who was one of my mentors when I was getting my doctorate, was, where do the roots of justice flow from your narrative? Like, what was the moment or the moments that began to matriculate you into a movement around speaking truth to power and fighting racial and economic injustices? And that's one of the, and that's a constant quest, right? And that's one of the questions that I ask, some of the young folk that I mentor, so that when they're out in the street or in the pulpit or in other areas, that they have a good informed perspective of the internal dynamics that are causing them to act upon or speak to a certain situation. And I think that ongoing conversation, courageous conversation, deliberate dialogue, and then, reading, like lots of reading and pulling apart authors, whether it's Eddie Glaude or, Isabella Wilkinson or, Toni Morrison, James Baldwin. I mean, it's all of that. It's kind of like a gumbo. It's not just a one path to this kind of movement. So, that's kind of my approach to folk whom I've been mentoring. Stay in the conversation, stay engaged, and also stay accountable. Because here's the other thing, right? We view prophets, John the Baptist, Jeremiah, as these folk who are in ministry, who are doing what they're doing by themselves, when in fact, the best of the prophetic ministry always has those prophets connected to community. That's right. So I always ask folk, where's your village? I mean, I know you're out there on the street, but where's your village? To whom are you accountable to? Right? We know God's called you, but that call has to be affirmed. Who called you forward? Who called your name in addition to God? And so who said that you were ready for this? Right? So, I think the community helps hold folk accountable, so that when we get out there, we've got some folks that we got to come back home to and give it a reckoning to or an accounting for.
I want to jump off on that and then bring us back in, because you and I, we have our regular conversations, and this is sort of following one of our conversations that go from here to there and everywhere, which is great. I want to tie back what you just said, though, having a village. So, one of the things that, oftentimes people are, talking to us about politics, and, we get all these politicians all the time that was like, oh, can you endorse me? Can you stand up with me? The whole 9 yards. And
you get that too?
Yeah, we get it. Absolutely. But, part of it for me is I want us as the community to develop our own people.
Yes.
And this is their calling and ministry, to be in political office, right? So that the people that are running emerge from the community, they don't decide to run and then have to go build a community. You know what I mean? And so part of it for me, is I believe that part of our job as organizers, as prophets, is to help develop and lead. Now, I've been in public office. It wasn't all it's cracked up to be. I thought we were going to be able to do all these kind of wonderful things and get there. And it's like, we spent 3 months arguing about raising the parking meter 25 cents an hour. That was just a sheer waste of time.
Right.
So, part of me is sort of like, how are we, going to develop, whether it's lay folk or the clergy people who understand that their calling is to go into the political realm in their particular place. And let me just say, I don't think the pinnacle of being in the public square is being an elected official. I think it's a role. It's not necessarily the role. And I believe that being a prophet in the public square is one of the main roles of being in the public square, right? It's like we could, we talk about Jesus being prophet, priest, and king. And that there are several roles that there are people that are called to be prophets, people that are called to be priests, there are people that are called to be, kings and queens, and people that operate in that, that political realm. And so, but there's a balance that comes, and each of them there's a tension and a balance that comes in that space. So, how do we begin the process of discovering those who amongst us, who think like us, who care and are passionate about the people the way that we are? How are we developing them and preparing them for that role of entering into the public square as representatives of people of faith who actually care about people?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think, and we know this as a principle of organizing, and Paul Tillich said the first law of love is to listen. And I think there are folk all around us who are in pain, folk all around us who are deeply traumatized. And we who dare to be prophetic and dare to say we care, and we're doing this because God has called us, and we're basing that upon love. We've got to be able to listen individually, intentionally, to the cries of those around us that we often can't hear because of the noise of every day. And so there are folk who are ready. I think of Ezekiel 37. Can these bones live? Oh Lord, only thou knowest. And part of listening to our young people, to our elders, to the folk in our neighborhoods and our families, is part of breathing that ruach, right?
Yes.
Those folk who I know are talked down to, are made invisible, disposable, not seen. And so I think one of the first things we have to do is engage in conversations. We call them one-on-ones, right? So because power is built through relationship.
Absolutely.
And so that's one thing we got to do. We got to assemble the bones. In our community, we got bones, man. We got these bones in our community. We've got someone who is being evicted, bone. We got someone who's got a leaking pipe in their basement and sores backing up, bones. We got someone who has got lead paint and their child keeps on putting their lip on the windowsill, bone. We got someone who's being extorted by a landlord and is being demanded to do things with their body in order to pay the rent, bones. We got folk on the corner selling themselves for a thimble full of heroin to get rid of the trauma of being molested as a child, bone, right? These are bones, but we got to be able to listen to the stories and the cries of God's children that are out there waiting to be prophets. They're waiting to be prophets. And so we gotta assemble the bones, man. We got to assemble the bones. And then we got to, after we assemble those bones and we are loving on those bones and they are loving on us and the sinners are coming back up, we'll find a righteous army that's out there in our communities, right? The harvest is plentiful. The laborers,
yes, sir,
don't want to listen. And so that's the first thing we got to do. We got to listen, right? Exodus, God calls Moses, I've heard the cries of my people, right? then I think that we've got to go on this journey, and part of this journey is about reimagining a curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
We have to assemble and reimagine a curriculum in order to inspire and inform and mentor this school of prophets,
Mm-hmm.
individually and collectively. And I think it's got to speak to the heart, the mind, the soul, and the spirit. That's what's really needed. That's what's really needed. I think about, some of the best conversations I've ever had. I mean, let me just say this is probably not I loved seminary. My seminary experience was great, but it was the conversations in the cafe,
Mm-hmm.
and the points of contention that we had to wrestle with certain authors that happened between the students. That's when the real stuff emerged.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
We got to be able to have those conversations, and that's messy. Jeremiah 1, pluck up, pull down root. That's messy.
Yes, sir.
Resurrection. That's like being a grave robber. That's messy.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking to the bones, messy. So this is not a sanitized aesthetic that we can promote if we're going to be engaged, I think, in the work of the public square. So, so I think we have to reimagine a new curriculum.
Yeah, I mean, I think not only curriculum, but I think you're also talking about imagining a new narrative too, right? So you went through the list of people that were bones, and as you were going through that, I was sitting there saying, and there's a mayor, and there's a council person, there's a school board member, right?
Yes, sir.
And they're bringing those experiences into the places of the public arena that they're able to share their stories, imagine other people's pain, and then create policies that are going to be transformative instead of extractive and exclusionary.
Right.
And I think we have this narrative that political leaders are supposed to be perfect. I actually don't want I don't want a perfect preacher, and I don't want a perfect political leader, because if your life has been so easy and your life has been so perfect, you will not do anything in my regard, because you think that everything is supposed to come easy, and it doesn't. It doesn't. I mean, when I ran for office, and talk about this, one of the first things they said, anything you ever did wrong, when you do your announcement, you got to put it all out there so nobody can use it against you. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, all my troubles are actually what makes me qualified to run for this office.
Absolutely.
And we've got to begin to reverse that process, right? Because our political system is not redemptive, it's punitive.
Right.
But as people of faith, our job is not to be punitive, but redemptive.
Yes.
And so we need to help train our political leaders from the earliest stage, long before they ever run, to be redemptive, so that they can actually redeem a community instead of trying to operate and punish a community.
Yep.
Does that make sense? I mean, maybe I wouldn't.
No. I mean, that's a good word. I mean, that's.
No, bro, you had the word.
That means transparency, and that means a level also of, dare I say, vulnerability, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so yeah, I'm with you on that. Absolutely.
Well, man, I always like to do this at the end of the podcast, which is always kind of funny. Man, I spent too many years watching Christian television before I said I would not watch it anymore. But if you had to talk to somebody right now about getting engaged in this work of being a prophet and helping to develop people in their callings to operate in the public square, whether as a prophet or as a person that's elected official, what would you tell them about getting engaged in this work? Why should they get engaged in this work?
So I would say, the why and the how may be two different things, but the why is, it's a ministry of love. I mean, the work of the prophetic is a ministry of love, and love supersedes all. I mean, that is the linchpin between all of our various faith traditions.
Sure.
Right? So the ministry of love and the work of that of a prophet are inseparable. We do this not simply because we love God, but we love neighbor. And we know that loving God and loving neighbor are also inseparable. In terms of like, what would be my first step? I mean, I'm there is no perfect first step, right? I mean, I learned to swim by getting in the pool. And so, is it reading a book? For some, that might be their entree, right? For some, it's reading the book. For another, it might be joining a community organizing entity like Power. Absolutely. For some, and we have had a whole lot of folk, neophytes, who've gotten engaged in this work post the 2016 presidential election, it might be just showing up at a rally, right? Sure. And having a conversation. For those that are a little further along, specifically for those that are in, I would say, the Black church or Christian ministry, and believe that there is something to this work that God might be calling them to, I would say, pick up the phone and, or reach out on social media. I mean, like, I have talked to some incredible leaders around the country that, we're friends, quote unquote friends, really acquaintances, on social media. We follow each other and just, text them and say, can we talk? What you did, what you said, that piece that you wrote was brilliant. And I have found 9 times, almost 10 times out of 10, that if someone is authentically doing the work of movement building and shaping, and they've got a call to the prophetic, they will always take time out of their schedule and say, yeah, let's talk. And literally, like, that's what I did with Jeremiah Wright. I mean, he would, Philadelphia guy. And he would do all the revivals in Philadelphia. And I was at Drew, and I was the president of the Theological Student Association, president of the Black Ministerial Caucus, and we had some money. We had a little bit of money. And so we brought him up. And so I self-selected to be the one to pick him up from the airport. So here I am at Newark Airport driving Jeremiah A. Wright, Jr. And so I made myself available to be his driver, to be his chauffeur while he was at Drew, to be his tour guide, to be his timekeeper. I put myself under that, in that relationship, and put myself in a position of being able to be mentored by, and that really created a lifelong kinship, even to this time. So that was just, I was just at the right time, at the right place, and made a phone call. But there are folk that I've talked to, Otis Moss, and not just, I'm not just talking about folk who are larger than life, but there are folk around the corner who are doing some great stuff too, who are unsung, who don't have Reverend Doctor in front of their names, but are showing up at council meetings and have determination and drive. Those are the folks we also need to be talking to and just saying, hey, can we talk about this, right?
Awesome. I really appreciate that. Well, Dr. Greg Edwards, we're going to have to get back in touch with you and continue this conversation and have you back on again. But really appreciate you showing up today and being a part of the Black Faith, Black Power podcast here, sponsored by Power Interfaith. And we so deeply appreciate all your ministry and the work that you do. Continue in power, brother. Continue in power. And
I appreciate you, Bishop Royster. Thank you for this time. It's been delightful. Thank you.
God bless you, man. Go out, change the damn world, brother. Because if you don't, nobody else will.
Right.
All right. Peace and blessings to you.
Blessings to you.
Thank you for listening to Black Faith, Black Power, produced by Power Interfaith.